Computer. Hello, everyone. My name is Kathryn Luchok, and I am faculty in the Department of Anthropology, Women and Gender Studies program. I'm going to be talking to you today about sticky messages and a 2-year follow-up program about reproductive health literacy for workshops in foster care group homes. And I'd like to give a shout out to my co-authors. I'd like to start out with talking a little bit about traditional sex ed and why should we even worry about having another kind of sex ed. One of the reasons is that while there's been a big focus on promoting the access to contraception, which is an important thing, it is really only part of the issue. There needs to be the underlying issues addressed of reproductive literacy, particularly when you're talking to young people, so that they really have a better understanding about their own bodies and what they need to generate an interest in contraception. Traditional sex ed is often fear-based, preachy, and downright boring. And one of the reasons it's boring is because of the curse of knowledge, this idea that we get so steeped in clinical details and strip everything of the emotions so that people just don't relate to it. And particularly an issue for health providers and teachers, we have a lot of information in our heads that is embedded in there, and we forget that not everybody knows what we know. So when we talk, we're shorthanding, we're saying things that are sometimes just yada, yada, yada to the people that we're trying to reach. And so that is the curse of knowledge, a real problem when it comes to having an accessible and memorable kind of sex ed. So we don't really positively inform. We also often diminish connection, particularly when we've got the curse of knowledge going on. And we discourage mindfulness of people being active listeners and being able to take charge of their own health and their own personal empowerment about their sexuality. So we had a project that we provided innovative workshops using a triad of sticky messaging, normalization, and connection, a different way of communicating for sticky messaging, normalizing things, and featuring that connection between people. And we used it in group home teens and staff. So sticky messages use humor, everyday language, simple analogies, concrete metaphors, and they make very complicated reproductive facts more easily understood. Normalization shifts the focus away from shame, taboos, judgment, and fear-based messages. And connection is promoted by getting rid of those preachy, you do this and you do that messages with more empowering we messages, because we know that we all go through puberty. We all had some kind of sexual debut, and it lets us have that real common humanity where people are seen and valued without judgment. So why did we go to foster care group homes? Well, first of all, South Carolina itself ranks 11 out of 51 in teen pregnancies. So even though the rates have been going down in our state and across the nation, we still are an outlier with very high rates that need to come down even more. Girls in foster care, though, are 2.5 times more likely to get pregnant than other girls their age. Nearly half have been pregnant by age 19, and almost a third have a child by age 19. So this high-risk population is already at a deficit because we have really crummy, not medically accurate and not comprehensive sex education in most of our schools in the state. And if you are moving around like often foster care children are, then you might miss the one day that it's done in school. So you have a double deficit. Can't even get the crummy sex ed, so often no sex ed at all. This is a visual that also shows the foster care female youth in dark blue and lighter blue for the not foster care female youth. And the differences by age 17 and 18 for pregnancies, great difference, an even greater difference by age 19, and then not quite as much of a difference, but still more for repeat pregnancies by age 19. So what are sticky messages, and can we talk a little bit more about that? The book Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, who are psychologists, came out, and they were talking about why some ideas survive and others die. And they looked at things like urban legends, the golden rule, and they said, what do these things have in common? Because those are things everybody knows and they can repeat verbatim. It really is memorable. What does that? Why do those stick and other things not stick? Even very important things not stick. They had a lot of really fun and interesting examples in their book, but they came up with this idea of success, which is kind of a sticky message itself, right? For the 6 elements that are the attributes of sticky ideas. First of all, that it be simple. Do unto others as others do unto you. Very simple kind of idea, easy to grasp and understand. Unexpected, surprising. Brain research says, hey, you know what? If it's surprising, it sticks in your brain better. Concreteness, things you can touch, feel, and relate to things you already know. Credibility, that it's reasonable, that the person saying it is trustworthy, as well as the message is trustworthy and reasonable. Emotions, we are wired for emotion. If you go see a movie that makes you cry or makes you laugh, you remember it much better than a movie that you don't have much feeling for, right? We remember the highs and the lows. Emotions are things that really stick in our mind, and we are wired for that. We're also wired for stories, narratives, because since the beginning of people, we've been sitting around fires telling stories to each other, this narrative way of doing it. So to be successful is to have a story that's emotional, credible, concrete, unexpected, and very simple. The population that we dealt with in this study were 60 group home staff participants in the middle of South Carolina, and 118 participants, workshops at 5 group homes and 2 Urban League foster care groups. Staff had instruction of 1.5-hour workshop. Why did we talk to staff? Because we wanted them to become reproductive health warriors, to be the advocates in support of teens under their care for reproductive health literacy. We also told them they had to look at their own personal history and how that affects our ability to connect. That normalization of the universal event of puberty and sexual debut is something that we can all relate to, and it can help us connect to kids who are beginning to go through this and help them to have a healthier way of getting through it than perhaps we ourselves did. We also told them about sticky messaging and gave them lists of sticky messages that they could use after we were gone. Teens had 2 1.5-hour workshops. The first workshop was normalization connection, puberty, a human universal, anatomy and physiology, with sticky messaging and the toolbox. And she really does use a toolbox. Here it is. And here's the toolbox with some of the contents out of there. Workshop 2 was the double C's, contraception and condoms. Methods were passed around. We actually brought methods to show how small an IUD really is, how tiny the little Nexplanon is that goes in your arm. Models, so you could put a Nuva ring in, squeeze it and put it in. And also a model that showed you how an IUD goes in. So it takes away a lot of the mystery and the fear that you might have about these methods and lets you actually see and touch them. And a lot of people, boys and girls, thought that that was really interesting. We did these workshops with boys and girls together. And there was no joshing and kidding around. You know, people were really rapt and interested. The other thing about the double C's, contraception and condoms, is that is a message that needs to go to everybody, no matter what kind of sex they're practicing. And that includes people that don't think that they're going to have penile vaginal sex, who are perhaps interested only in same-sex relationships. A lot of times people that consider themselves gay or lesbian will find that either through coercion or by accident or perhaps by design that they will have a time to have penile vaginal intercourse. So they need to know about contraception and condoms, both female condoms and male condoms. We had those and pass those around as well. We talk about rethinking fluids. A big message is STI and HIV prevention. And we talk about IDDF. I don't do fluids, not I'm not going to have sex, or you can't have sex, or we won't have sex, but rather I don't do fluids. If we're going to do this, we need to get condoms. And it's an easy to remember way, and it's an empowering way to talk about this. So sticky messages were created by Linda Robinson, who is an advanced nurse practitioner. And she was in the health department for 13 years in the family planning unit. And she realized that from her teaching days as a biology science teacher, that she needed to bring some of that kind of teaching back out of the classroom into the clinic. So she realized that people weren't getting her messages because she didn't do good messages, not because they weren't listening. So she found different ways to do this, and she began to do these sticky messaging. She had not read Chip and Heath's the Heath book. In fact, I think maybe she began to do this before they even published the book. But when she did find the book, she found that it was really a good way to describe what she was already doing. So this is the male reproductive system with the delivery tube, and also some cream that you put in a teaspoon, which is the typical ejaculate. So she asked, how many sperm are in that typical little tiny teaspoon, right? And people would say 100, 1,000, 100,000. She said, oh, all sterility. She opens up this bottle of sand and begins to pour it out, all that sand. And she says you would be sterile, 350 to 500 million sperm, and they love their job. So boys go and girls go, and everybody realizes, IDDF, what a good idea. Sticky messaging for girls, for the fact that we have a reproductive cycle that's inside. Males have things on the outside, and they're used to it and they're comfortable with it in ways that girls often aren't. And Linda found a lot of her clients, when they come to the family planning clinic, are not very comfortable with their bodies. So she said, how can you have a relationship with something you cannot see? So she created this, egg cartons, glorified egg cartons, ovaries, a nest with shredded paper, your menstrual blood and tissue, and your nest, your womb, your uterus, a way to get things in and out, a tube, a toilet paper tube, your cervix. So fun, funny, colorful, unexpected for sure, and gave people a way to talk about the fact that hormonal birth control keeps your egg carton shut. That's an easy thing to remember. That the delete button happens when there's no fertilization, or when an egg doesn't even appear to be fertilized. And then everything goes out through that tube, that cervix. So she puts this on a belt. It's very fun. It's very funny. And she says for 35 years, most women are trying to avoid pregnancy, that they spend about 5 years trying to be pregnant, being pregnant, or postpartum, the rest of the time stopping this machine. And that hormonal birth control can also do a lot to reduce this buildup and make for much easier periods and less cramping. So we did an evaluation. The data was collected internally. We collected it pre and post test data. We had an external analyst hired, Shumei Fan, who did the higher level analyses. We collected baseline pre-test and immediate post-test. We would have liked to have done a quasi-experimental, but we didn't have the money or the time to do that. We used the survey based on several prep questions from CDC, so it could be related to other forms of established sex ed programs. We collected narrative data from open-ended questions. We did process counting numbers trained, observation of workshops. We entered the data, and then that was Isabella and Zola Jane, my co-authors, were students, and they helped collect and enter data. And then Shumei put it into SPS and did frequencies, chi-square, P's, and ANOVA across groups for differences. We had narrative data reviewed for themes, and the 2-year follow-up interviews with staff were done by Sarah Christopher for her honors thesis. Teens ranged in a wide range, but most of them were 13 to 18 and 8 to 12th grade. The majority were African American, although we did have other groups represented. The majority were female and also straight, although we had people from all sexualities. 47.7% reported ever having sexual intercourse, and of those sexually active, only 40% had ever used contraception. Though they had a low pregnancy rate, they had a high risk of pregnancy. And currently, in the last 3 months, some of them were not currently having sexual intercourse. So when we look at the pretest, the key here is none of the time. None of the time using 45, almost 46%, no contraception, any of the time. Condoms, over 46%, never, none of the time. Post-test, intention to use, yes, indeed, that was not behavior, but it's on its way to behavior in the next 6 months. What is your prediction, your intention? Much more likely, almost 60%, over 60% for condoms, and almost for contraception. If you add in somewhat more likely, it becomes close to 70% for both. Also, vast numbers knew more about contraceptive methods, knew more about accessing birth control, felt more confident about choosing a method, understood more about the female system and the male system, said they were much more likely to abstain from sex, 37%. So not making them run out and have sex, but rather go ahead and abstain. And 52%, almost 53%, were more comfortable talking with staff about reproductive health care. Over 85% of the strongly agree and agree combined were statistically significant that they knew where to get birth control. That went from pre to post test, understood all the choices of birth control from pre to post test, would feel more comfortable talking to a doctor or nurse about birth control. The ANOVA, we looked at racial and gender differences. Only gender came out as a difference between pre and post test scores, and boys had more gains than girls. And we think perhaps because boys do not get this information very often and perhaps have a larger deficit. The staff also had a wide age range. They reflected their population that they serve, 65% African American and 85% female. Large percentage reported being more comfortable talking with teens about reproductive health, something we really wanted to see. 91% felt more prepared after the workshops to advocate for teens, to be that reproductive health warrior. 84.5% knew where to refer teens for contraception versus 71.7%. So more than a 10% gain. Narratives included comparing these workshops to other sex ed that they had attended. So people said it was more realistic, more effective, more open and not sugar-coated, said one of the boys. Truth and honesty is helpful and can provide understanding in developing healthy sex lives. Made it much more easy to talk to clients and my own children. A lot of people said they had the sex talk with their kids after they had the workshop with us. Well, 2 years post follow-up, what happened? Messages stuck with staff. They could recount details and catchphrases, so they really, really remembered their sticky messaging. They said they were better able to have discussions still with teens under their care. They were more competent in referring teens to services. The teens were more knowledgeable still about their bodies and how to advocate for themselves in the health system. And they were better able to talk to their own children about reproductive health and about puberty. Some of the quotes talked about the trauma that these kids had, that we were trauma informed, that we were body positive, and that was really important to make sure the kids were okay. So we were trauma informed. The frontline staff come from a lot of conservative and religious family backgrounds. So this was a way for them to be able to discuss these things without condemning, without judging, and essentially understanding their history and trying to get around it. This person talked about her little baskets and the red streamers. So she remembered all the details and the eggs flying around and how you needed to, what happened if you didn't take your birth control correctly. Someone else said it wasn't dry or scientific. There was humor, props. It engaged the audience. That we were very real, that we were straight with people, that we used their language, spoke on their level, that it made teens wake up and start listening, that we really catered to them, that they learned a lot, that kids, not just foster kids, but kids in general, the shock value, that unexpected, lots of information that people could remember. I loved this one. It made kids feel like queens, because when you say your body is a temple, you are that queen. And the day after she left, we made crowns and just walked around with crowns on our head. So they felt really empowered. The groups that got education from her, they were informed, they could verbalize and very specifically say what they wanted and needed. The topics discussed were things that this person does continuing education, and she uses the information for church groups and interest groups, and she's found it very helpful. Another person talked about going to church functions and pooling groups of teens together and talking about these things. And it wasn't no and taboo, but rather okay. And she said, so yeah, she opened my eyes to a lot. And I also called my grandparents to tell them it's okay to talk about sex. So did we have barriers? Yes, we did. COVID hit during the time of the follow-up, and she had to switch to in-person, from in-person to telephone. Sarah found it harder to contact participants. A lot of people weren't in their offices regularly, but she was very persistent and she did get them. There was no funding for follow-up. The additional funding would have allowed us to do more extensive, robust evaluation with a quasi-experimental design, and we were unable to get access to teens for direct follow-up with them, although we would have really liked to do that. We got some ideas from the staff about how teens were doing, but we didn't get to actually talk to them. There was a concerted effort that's needed to continue with follow-up, and perhaps refresher courses are needed at some point, but at least 2-year post, it indicated that the messages were really sticking with the group home staff, and we hope with the teens as well. Expanded funding would, of course, allow expansion across the state, and train the trainer could also increase our reach. And we did see that some people informally were doing that. Evidence indicates that it is an effective method in sex education that could have wide application. And we know it can have wide application because we've used it in a lot of other settings as well, with Healthy Start community health workers and PASO's community health workers. PASO's works with Latinx groups. Our Healthy Start community is mainly serving postpartum and prenatally women of color. They worked together and got their own kits made. And we also gave them reproductive contraceptive kits that they took on their home visits. Centering pregnancy, domestic violence shelter personnel, we talked to all of them. So adults as well as teens and preteens even. The materials such as reproductive anatomy toolbox are mostly everyday articles, things you often have at home, like egg cartons. They're free or low cost to make. You can get stuff at the Dollar Tree. We stretched our budget with free student assistance by giving them course credit and providing research experience for them and training. Linda, as the trainer, and me as the PI, took minimal salary, and we had key partners in the foster care world. The Palmetto Association for Children and Families was the group home group, and they put it in their newsletter and gave us a list with all the contact information and really helped us get in there. And of course, the individuals group home leads, the directors, were great in helping us get access to both the teens and their staff. The Layla Foundation awarded us $25,000, and we very much thank them for funding us. The in-kind support from the Department of Anthropology was also very appreciated. And then Women and Gender Studies at USC provided travel funding both for our preliminary data and also later for what we're presenting here and APHA in October. So if you're interested, please contact us. Here's my information. We'd be interested in collaborating. We'd be interested in collaborating on grants with you. If that's a possibility, we would be able to work with helping you put this into existing sex ed programs or doing it as a standalone. So please contact us. And I thank you very much. And we will end here.